Get back into Matthew 27, 11 through 25 here. And are we rolling? Good deal. So, let's go ahead and deal with how Pontius Pilate received and dealt with Jesus, because we just went over how the Pharisees and Judas dealt with them. But now we need to look at how Pontius Pilate and the Jews, the general population of the Jews, dealt with Jesus, because you have a big dichotomy there as well. So we're in the middle of his trial, which I said, of course, is an illegal trial. It was a wrong trial, both on the Jewish front and on the Roman front. So we need to examine that a little bit. So let's get right into the passage here and kind of read what's going on. It says, "Now Jesus stood before the governor," which of course was Pontius Pilate. And Pilate, a little bit of background on Pontius Pilate there. He, we know that he existed because we found his Roman bust, his marble statue, and there's inscriptions of him. And he was actually called the prefect, and that was the Greek word. He was the prefect, and it's equal to a governor. So he's governor over Israel and Judea at that time. So that's why the New King James translates it as governor. And one thing about Pontius Pilate was he was a very insecure and a very paranoid person. Historically, he's a lot like Herod in that way. Very paranoid, very insecure. And you're going to see that insecurity kind of pop out here, because he was kind of unsure of himself. And he was one of these people that was always, trying to give himself credibility. He's always trying to give himself credibility. He was always worried about an uprising. He was always worried about people not taking him seriously. Very insecure. So you'll pick that out when you read about Pontius Pilate here. And it says, "And the governor asked him, 'Are you the king of the Jews?'" Just a pointed question. And Jesus said to him, "It is as you say." See, so he's already answered yes to the Jewish nation. Now he's answering yes to the Romans. But you're going to see something else. Jesus remains silent later, too. Just like when he was answering and remaining silent with the Jews, he's going to answer and remain silent with the Romans, too. His MO never changes, actually. He's consistent. He stays the same. So they asked him a pointed question. He answered it. Later on, they asked him something else. He remained silent. So that's just showing what's going on here. And while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he answered nothing. Okay? So once again, he answered nothing. Then Pilate said to him, "Do you not hear how many things they testify against you?" But he answered them not a word. It's again, he's just remaining silent. So that the governor marveled greatly. And why did the governor marvel greatly here? The issue is pretty obvious. Because the governor is used to people bowing the knee, because Rome had so much power. Rome could take off your head and crucify you at the drop of a hat if they so chose. They had absolute control, or so they thought. But here's this man who doesn't seem bothered by him. He's sitting here and he's not answering a word, almost like he's at total peace. Almost like I'm the one in control, not you. And we see later on, in John, I don't think I have that verse down here, but in John, I think it's in John, Pontius Pilate asked Jesus, it's like, "Don't you know that I have the power to take your life?" And he says, "You would have no power unless my Father in heaven granted it to you." I'm paraphrasing, but he said, "Your power is delegated. You have no power. I'm the one with the power. You're treating me this way because I'm allowing you to, pretty much." That was Jesus' attitude. And that's why he's just sitting there remaining silent, because these people aren't fazing him. And that's why Pilate here's marveling. He's like, "Well, what's going on? This guy doesn't seem like he's afraid of me." But you could see the kind of the insecurity going on here too. It's like this guy isn't afraid of me. What's going on? He marveled at it. Okay. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wish. So there was a Jewish and a Roman practice here that if you wanted to, you can have a prisoner swap. You can pardon someone and have someone set free in the place of another prisoner. You could do a prisoner swap. So that's what's going on here. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release you, Barabbas or Jesus, who's called the Christ?" And it's not mentioned here. Matthew doesn't mention this, but Barabbas was actually a thief and a murderer. Mark, Luke, and John bring that out. All Luke does here is just mention that Barabbas was there. So here you are. You have the sinless Son of God, and you have a ruthless thug, more or less. And they picked the ruthless thug. So it shows you once again where the heart of the people were. But next verse. For he knew that they had handed him over because of envy. So the Pharisees gave Jesus over because they were envious of Jesus. They wanted to get rid of Jesus because Jesus was stealing their thunder. Jesus was threatening their power. Jesus was threatening their authority. And while he was sitting on the judgment seat, in the Greek that's the bema seat, Paul calls and what's cool about that is Paul calls Jesus' judgment seat the bema seat. Right here, this is the Roman bema seat. This is the bema seat in Jerusalem that Pontius Pilate was sitting on. So there is a contrast there. It's like, the judge is being judged by a lesser judge. So you got the judge of the world being judged by a lesser judge here. So Matthew's good at showing that irony throughout his book, because he purposely brings out, there's a judgment seat here, but who are they judging? Pontius Pilate is judging the judge. Just think that through, guys. Pontius Pilate is judging the judge. Everything's reversed here. Now, why do you think everything is reversed? Because the whole point of this passage is to show, the whole point of the book is to show that Jesus is the Messiah, the anointed one, the King, the one that's going to sit upon the throne of David, the one that takes away the sins of the world. And as John said, he who knew no sin became sin for us. That's actually Paul who said that, And the idea is that Jesus was perfect. Jesus was without sin, and he became sin for us. So the judge was judged. That's why I always have that illustration, Ashley, whenever I present the gospel. It's like, hey, it's like me killing one of your family members and going to jail, and the judge going to prison for me. That's exactly what happened. The judge is being judged unrighteously. Why? Because our sin is getting ready to be placed on him. It's a beautiful, beautiful thing. For us, it's corrupt in reality, but it's beautiful for us because it shows the love of God. Because once again, Jesus is sitting here, willingly giving himself over to it, because he's the one in control, not Pilate. It's awesome. But while he was sitting on the judgment seat, his wife, Pontius Pilate's wife, sent to him, saying, "Have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him." So Pontius Pilate's wife had a dream saying, "Hey, don't put this guy to death. Don't put this guy to death." But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes. And by the way, where did that dream come from? Where did that dream come from? Was that a divine dream? Would God tell Pontius Pilate not to kill the Messiah? Possibly it could have been part of his plan. Or was this a demonic dream, trying to prevent the Messiah from dying? I don't think so, because Satan wanted the Messiah dead. So that's one of those little things that's going on here. It's like, well, where did that dream come from? What's God doing here? So, but that's kind of cool there too. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. Then the governor answered and said to them, which of the two of you do you want me to release for you? And they said, Barabbas. Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus who is called the Christ? And think about that. Think about the Greek here. Jesus is the Greek word Jesus. It means Yahweh saves. And Christ is the Greek word for Christos. Is the Greek word Christos, which means Messiah. So whenever he says, who shall I relate to you? Who shall I do with Jesus, Yahweh saves, who is called the Messiah? See, he has a clear identity here. They knew who he claimed to be. They knew who he claimed to be, and what did they say? And they all said to him, let him be crucified. It was a rejection. And right here is the public national rejection of Jesus. In Matthew 15, we had the religious leaders rejecting him. Here, we have the public rejecting him. And the governor said, why? What evil has he done? Answer that question, nothing. But they cried out all the more, saying, let him be crucified. So what do you have here, Chad? This is a mob rule. The witch hunt has come to a head. They have a mob mentality now. Reason has left the building. They're just chanting, crucify him, crucify him, crucify him. They're not even thinking anymore. It's all pure, raw emotion. Logic and reason is gone. It's gone. We've seen it in our nation. We've seen it everywhere else. When logic leaves the building, all you have left is the depravity of man. You do whatever is within your heart. That's what we see here. Okay, and when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, see, Pilate is giving up. He's given up, but rather that the tumult was rising. He was insecure. He didn't want it. He was getting ready to back down because he feared Caesar and he feared the people. He was timid. He's just like, nah. He took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this just person. Yeah, are you? You're the one who, because remember, the Jews couldn't put someone to death. That only Rome could put someone to death. So Jesus' execution was up to Pilate. He was the judge. And he is choosing to judge a righteous man, put a righteous man to death for no reason, out of the fear of the mob. So is he innocent? No, he's corrupt. He's corrupt. See, this whole hand washing thing is just a justification. We're going to get to that. Okay? And he says, you see to it. And all the people answered and said, his blood be on us and on our children. Oh, wow, so you're cursing yourself so he's pretty much said, if he's wrong, allow us our children to take the debt, take the guilt for it. Boy, you can see just the wickedness of the people there. But there's a lot of parallels to this because in reality, when Jesus was standing before Pilate had to handle Jesus in a certain way. He had to look at Jesus. He had to deal with Jesus in a certain way. And how are we presented to Jesus today? We're presented to Jesus in the gospel. So every man, when presented the gospel, has to handle Jesus in much the same way that Pilate had to handle Jesus and how the Jews had to handle Jesus. So let's pull out some points here that kind of helps us understand what's going on. When presented the gospel, number one, we can consider and accept Christ. That's our first choice. We can consider and accept him. And where do we get that? Well, look at the text. Now, Jesus stood before the governor, and the governor asked him, saying, are you the king of the Jews? And isn't that interesting? In other words, he's saying, are you the Messiah? See, Pilate kind of knew what was going on here. Are you the king of the Jews? And he said, it is as you say. Well, what does Pilate do with that? Does he trust in the Messiah? Does he look to the Messiah? How does he deal with that news? Because you have someone claiming to be the Jewish Messiah. Did Pilate even know what the Messiah was? Did it pique his interest at all? Well, the text seems to imply that it did. Pilate was kind of quaking in his boots. He was like, I don't feel comfortable with this. I have someone here claiming to be the Jewish Messiah, to be the Jewish king, and I'm just going to willy-nilly put this guy to death? So you can see where a lot of his apprehension was coming from. There was some turmoil going on within his heart. But where was that turmoil coming from? Was it coming from God? Yeah, I'd say partially. Partially. But I'm sure a lot of the turmoil was coming from the big mob there in front of him, threatening to have his head if he doesn't do something with Jesus. So Pilate made a bonehead decision here. I get that. But look at the circumstance, guys. You have a pagan who is trapped between a rock and a hard place. He's trapped between a rock and a hard place. He's in an impossible situation. And he doesn't have the Spirit. He's a complete and total pagan. You got to cut him a little bit of slack here because he's in a tough spot. He's in a tough spot, you know. I'm not justifying what he did, but he's human. So keep that in mind. And Jesus says, as you said, and while he was being accused by the chief priests and elders, he said nothing. And Pilate said to him, do you not hear how many things they testify against you? And we know later it was a false testimony. But, well, we already know it's a false testimony because the other passage said. So they were accusing him of threatening to tear down the temple and build it back up and of not keeping the Sabbath. But he answered him not one word. So the governor marveled greatly. And that's kind of what happened there. And the idea is that the Pilate had some sort of idea of truth. And he was pressing. And he was pressing because he wanted to get this right. He wanted to handle Jesus right. He was wanting to give Jesus the benefit of the doubt. But the mob was pulling him in an opposite direction. And because of that, he was faced with a decision. And he didn't handle the decision correctly, but there's someone who did handle the decision correctly, and that's the good old Philippian jailer. Because look at Acts chapter 16, verses 25 through 34, and this is when Paul was in Philippi, and him and Silas was locked up in prison, and angel came and released him from prison, and when the Philippian jailer, which is just a Roman soldier, realized what has happened, he's getting ready to take his own life. Because back then, if you lose a prisoner, they kill you. So in order not to be beheaded and shamed by the Roman government, this Roman soldier, the Philippian jailer, is getting ready to slit his own throat or to fall on the sword, pretty much, to kill himself, so he didn't have to suffer the shame of being tried before Caesar for losing a couple prisoners. That's the context. Look at what happened here. But at midnight, Paul and Silas were praying and singing hymns to God. Where are they singing hymns to God, guys? They're chained up in prison. Talk about the fact that happiness and joy does not rely on your circumstances. They're in a dingy, damp prison chained to a Roman guard here, and they're singing hymns to God and praying. And here we are, we're in our padded pews in our heated buildings in front of our Netflix and our Hulu, eating our Lucky Charms and Golden Crisp, and complaining that we don't have it good enough. It's like, come on, guys, we got to get with it. Get what I'm saying? But look at what he says. And the prisoners were listening to them. I like that little line there. And the prisoners were listening to them. Because it shows you that people are taking notice. It's like, you have these two weirdos, these two Jews over here chained against a wall in shackles. We're all miserable, but they seem to have joy. And they're singing praises to their God. And people are taking notice. And there's one guy in particular that's taking notice. It's that jailer. It's that jailer, okay? And suddenly there's a great earthquake, so that the foundations of the prison were shaken, and immediately all the doors were opened, and everyone's chains were loosed. So it just wasn't Paul and Silas's chains were loose. It was everyone's chains were loose. This poor Philippian jailer, Heather, he just wasn't losing Paul and Silas. He was losing everyone in the prison. No wonder he wanted to go and kill himself because this was a good old-fashioned jailbreak here. Everyone's getting ready to head out. You know, this would have looked like a incompetent, epic failure on this Philippian jailer's part. Okay. And look at what it says. And the keeper of the prison, awaking from sleep, he was asleep at the time, which makes it look even worse. You know? Even worse. It looks like it was pure incompetence and ineptness on the level of the U.S. government. It was that bad. Okay? And seeing that the prison doors open, supposing the prisoners had fled, drew his sword and was about to kill himself. But Paul called with a loud voice, and he shouted, "Do not harm yourself, for we are all here." See, they didn't leave the prison. Why did they leave the prison? Interesting, right? Then he called for a light and ran in and fell down trembling before Paul and Silas. Why had he been trembling? Well, probably because he'd been hearing them singing praises to the God all day, and now they're free. It probably shook them a little bit. And now, instead of fleeing, these guys had integrity and stayed in prison. Okay? And he brought them out and said, "Sirs, what must I do to be saved?" How did he know about salvation? Probably because they were singing about it. Right? And they said, "Believe on the Lord Jesus Christ, and you will be saved, you and your household." And they spoke the word of the Lord to him and all who was within his house. And they took them the same hour of the night and washed their stripes. And immediately he and his family were baptized. Now, when he had brought them into his house, he set food before them and rejoiced, having believed in God with all his household. Isn't that interesting? You had the Jewish nation who was looking for the Messiah and completely missed him. And you had this pagan jailer over in Philippi, in Greece, who was introduced to the Messiah through hymns and accepted him because he was seeking. Both people were presented the gospel in some way, but the Jews, once again, rejected, and the pagan accepted. And that's how it works, because this isn't up to us, it's up to God. And we have to remember that. So we can consider and accept Christ. Not everyone will, but we can. And that's a great example of that. The Jews refused to. The Philippian jailer succeeded in doing it. But number two, we can suppress and reject Christ, which again, that's what the Jews did. Look at verse 15 through 18. Now at the feast, the governor was accustomed to releasing to the multitude one prisoner whom they wished. And at that time, they had a notorious prisoner. So he just wasn't a prisoner, he was notorious. This is like Ted Bundy and Jeffrey Dahmer type stuff here. This is the Unabomber type stuff. This is like having Saddam Hussein and say, "Hey, here's Jesus, here's Saddam. Who do you want?" And they pick Saddam. They pick Osama bin Laden, not Obama. Obama should probably be in prison, but the point is you can release Jesus as a prisoner, okay? And that's the point. And so he's notorious, and he's called Barabbas. Therefore, when they had gathered together, Pilate said to them, "Whom do you want me to release to you, Barabbas or Jesus, who is called the Christ?" For they knew that they had handed him over because of envy. There's no evidence. They hated Jesus out of envy, and he knew that. It was obvious it was out of envy. Okay? And why did they hand him over envy? Because, once again, they suppressed and they rejected. It goes back to Romans 1, 18 through 20. For the wrath of God is revealed from heaven against all ungodliness and unrighteousness of men who suppress the truth and unrighteousness, because which may be known of God is manifested in them, for God has shown it to them. There was suppression of the truth. So we can either consider and accept Christ, or we can suppress and reject Christ. It's a choice that we have when we're presented Christ. We can look at him objectively and say, this guy claims to be the Messiah. This guy has signs that he is the Messiah. Am I going to trust his claim? or are you just going to ignore all the evidence and out of envy and your own sin and your own strife, reject it and suppress it, saying, I don't want them? And we know that no one seeks after God, and most people do reject. But even though no one does seek, we can seek and recognize God's revelation. Because look at Matthew 27, 19 through 23. While he was sitting on the judgment seat, Pilate was sitting on the judgment seat. Remember, his wife sent to him, saying, have nothing to do with that just man, for I have suffered many things today in a dream because of him. So, and I believe this was a divine dream, because doctrinally speaking, Satan wanted Jesus on the cross. Satan wanted to destroy Jesus. So I don't see a demon coming in and giving his wife this dream. This is probably divine. It was probably divine revelation. And it was just to show that God was in control. Okay? But, so she came in and told Pilate, choose wisely. You know what's going on here. They have handed him over due to envy. There's no evidence against him. You're up against a mob. You're up against people who are not doing this for the right reason. Make sure you choose wisely, because this is corrupt. But the chief priests and elders persuaded the multitudes that they should ask for Barabbas and destroy Jesus. And the governor answered and said to them, which of the two do you want me to release to you? So the fact is he is rejecting the divine revelation. But who accepted the divine revelation? His wife did. His wife accepted it. He's rejecting it. His wife knew who this man was. It was revealed to her. He suppressed it. He didn't seek it out. And that's what was, that is what is so sad about it. And they said Barabbas. And Pilate said to them, what then shall I do with Jesus who's called the Christ? And they said, let him be crucified. Then the governor said, why? What evil has he done? But they cried out all the more, saying, let him be crucified. Because once again, guys, in order to come to faith, you got to be able to seek. I've preached this so many times, and I can't emphasize it enough. It goes back to Romans 1 through 3. When you look at the creation, you know that creation couldn't just pop into existence out of nothing, and it can't be eternal. You know a creator had to create the world. There's no other explanation. So in order to find out that creator, or when we deal with that creator, we only have three choices with dealing with that creator. We can either explain him away and convince ourselves that he doesn't exist somehow. We can turn him into an idol that we can manipulate and twist to our own desires, or we can bow the knee, pray, and seek him, saying, Lord, Creator, I don't know who you are, but please reveal yourself to me. Those are our three choices. And we know that none seek him. But that's what Hebrews 11:6 reminds us of. But without faith, it's impossible to please him. For he who comes to God must believe that he is. What does that mean, to believe what he is? That means trust that he exists, that he is, or that he exists, that he is there. And that he is a rewarder of those who diligently seek him. Seek him. See, the creation is enough to tell us that there is a God there. But still up to the heart of man to choose to seek. But, as we say in Romans 3:10-11, as it is written, there is none righteous, no, not one. There is none who understands. There is none who seeks after God. We don't seek. Instead, we always deny his existence or twist him into a God that we can control and we can manipulate. We commit idolatry. We don't seek. And that's so important to remember, Heather, because anytime you read something in the Bible that you do not like about God, and you say, I don't like that characteristic of God, I don't like that truth claim, I'm just going to ignore that and pretend it's not there. That's a form of atheism, guys. Or at best, that's a form of idolatry. It's taking what's clearly written about God and saying, I'm going to replace it with something I like more. Or I'm just going to ignore that it's there. Do you see the Romans 1 through 3 thing there? You got those 3 choices, and we can still commit it today. When we read something we don't like about God, we can say, that doesn't exist. Or, let's change the meaning of that a little bit to make it more palatable for me. But what's the other choice we could do? We could bow the knee and say, well, Lord, you revealed it to me. That's who you are. And it doesn't matter if I like it or not. It doesn't matter if I agree with it or not. It's who you say you are, and I bow the knee and I accept it. The world doesn't do that, guys. The world doesn't do that. We can seek and recognize God's revelation. But what's number 4? On the flip side, we can seek and still reject God's revelation. Isn't that interesting? You could be a seeking soul, seeking truth, and when truth slaps you in the face, you can be like, oh, I don't like that truth. Let me reject that truth. I know it's true, but I don't want that. I don't want that. And that's what's possible. Look at verse 24. And when Pilate saw that he could not prevail at all, but rather that a tumult was rising, he took water and washed his hands before the multitude, saying, I am innocent of the blood of this person. You see to it. See, Pilate might not have knew that Jesus was the Messiah and God, but he knew he was innocent. He knew he was unjustly accused. He knew he was a special person. That was revealed to him. His wife had a dream saying, don't touch him. He was revealed. He sought truth. He was revealed truth, and he still decided not to accept it. He still decided not to accept it. But who else did this, guys? John 20:25. Go back to Doubting Thomas. Doubting Thomas walked with Jesus for 3.5 years. He saw Jesus rise from the dead. He saw Jesus heal the blind. He saw Jesus feed 5,000 people with 3 fishes and 5 loaves of bread. He saw Jesus walk on water. He saw Jesus curse a fig tree. He saw Jesus calm a storm. He saw Jesus heal lepers. You know, he saw Jesus do all of this stuff. Crazy stuff that is only divine. And when he died, and he even heard Jesus predict his own death, burial, and resurrection. And when Jesus died and laid in that tomb, after seeking and knowing truth for 3.5 years, what does Thomas say? Then other disciples therefore said to him, we have seen the Lord. And he, Thomas, said to them, unless I see his hands, unless I see in his hands the print of the nails, and I put my finger into the print of the nails, and put my hand into his side, I will not believe. It's like Thomas it was 3.5 years of miracles not enough for you. Was a righteous life without sin not enough for you? Why are you demanding more? And the reason is because you can seek truth, you can see truth, it can slap you in the face, and you can still just outright refuse to accept it. You can outright refuse to accept it. But later on, we know from this passage, what did he say? Jesus appears to him, and he doesn't even have to put his hands into the nail prints into his side, because the passage doesn't say he does it. The passage just says, Thomas looks at him and says, my Lord and my God. That's all it took. But the point is he was refusing here. So we can seek and still reject. And we do it all the time, guys. How many times have we prayed, oh, Lord, show me your will, show me your will, help me do this, and God shows you what he wants to do. I don't like that. I don't like that. That's not what I want to do. That's not the road I want to go down, Lord. I don't like that. I don't want to break up with this person. I don't want to go to Uganda as a missionary. I know I asked for you to show me your will, but this isn't what exactly I had in mind. And you start suppressing and rejecting, suppressing and rejecting, suppressing and rejecting. Right? So these are things that you want to keep in mind. You can seek and still reject. But number 5, we can totally suppress and attempt to destroy his message. Look at verse 25. And the people, with all this evidence, the people answered and said, his blood be on us. Not only on us, the guilt doesn't only go on us, but it goes on our children as well. And that's the point. We can totally suppress and reject his message. And this was that total suppression and rejection, guys. In the face of 3.5 years of ministry, these people who are rejecting him, a lot of them saw the same miracles that the disciples saw. And they're like, we don't care. We want him gone. He's a threat to us. He's a blasphemer. Let his blood be upon us and our children, and we reject him. And it's like, wow, that's suppression to a T. And where does that suppression come from? Remember, 1 Peter 5:8 tells us, be sober, be diligent, be vigilant, because your adversary, the devil, walks about like a roaring lion, seeking who he should devour. So remember, Satan is called a roaring lion. Why is he called a roaring lion? How does a lion hunt? A lion usually doesn't just run up and kill his prey. A lion will roar first, because his roar is so powerful that it actually paralyzes momentarily his prey in fear to make the prey easier to hunt. Most people don't know that. And that's what the devil does. He'll walk around and he'll induce fear into us somehow. So that way we take our eyes off of the Lord, and then he'll pounce. So whenever you fall into a sin, have you noticed that your sin is always preceded by some sort of other fear or anxiety or some sort of other attack which takes your eyes off of God? See, he'll trick you into taking your eyes off of God, and then he'll pounce with the temptation. That's what Satan does. That's his MO. So that's what Satan does. And remember, Ephesians 2:1-3, and you he made alive who were once dead in trespasses and sins, in which you once walked according to the course of this world, according to the prince of the power of the air, the spirit who now works in the sons of disobedience. Satan is the god of this world. Satan is the prince of the power of the air. And the people of this world are walking after him. And that is who is controlling this suppression and this rejection. They're given in to the roaring lion, and he's devouring them. So it's the spirit that now works in the sons of disobedience, among whom also we all once conducted ourselves in the lust of our flesh, fulfilling the desires of the flesh and of the mind, and were by nature children of wrath, just as the others. And remember, if the world hates you, you know that it hated me before it hated you. Because the hatred comes from Satan. And we have to always remember that. We can totally suppress and attempt to destroy the message because Satan is behind the destruction, and we're walking in Satan. So this is what we look at, guys, when we presented the gospel. We can consider and accept Christ. We can suppress and reject Christ. We can seek and recognize God's revelation. We can seek and still reject God's revelation. And after that rejection, if you do reject God's revelation, what ends up happening is number 5, we can totally suppress and attempt to destroy the message. Because if you suppress the truth, remember that word suppress means to hold under. It was used to, hold someone's head underwater to drown them. When we try to suppress God, it's like we're trying to kill God's message. We're trying to kill God's truth. If we attempt to do that, it doesn't stay dead. It doesn't stay dead. We have to, in order for it to go away from our lives, we have to totally suppress it and attempt to destroy it. We got to keep it held under. You can't let up because God doesn't give up. God pursues and pursues and pursues, and the only reason people don't believe is because they keep on suppressing and suppressing and suppressing and suppressing and suppressing. They keep that head on that foot on the head. Keep that foot on the head of God's truth and keep on trying to drown it out so they don't have to be accountable to it. And guys, that's something that we have to understand. Please understand that this is a choice that we all make. People, when any of us doubt God's word, it's not because of the lack of evidence or lack of evidence against it. It's because we don't want to believe it, and we're thinking of alternatives to it. That's all it is. We're thinking about, what if it's this, this, and this instead of what's written? We're just thinking of alternatives because we're suppressing this in our heart. We don't want to believe it. So we're dreaming up counterfeits to replace it. And we do it constantly. And God's saying, stop suppressing what's written and just trust it. Because you have no reason to suppress it. You're suppressing it because you're listening to the demons of the world and you don't like what's written and you're trying to get rid of it. You're trying to destroy it. Stop it. And believers can do that too. So let's always remember that. So we do these things not only when we're presented the gospel, but we do these things when we're presented any truth claim. So that's important. So let's pray. Father, thank you for our good service today, and I just pray that you keep us safe until Wednesday. And we just love you, Lord God, and bring us back safely at the end, and just help us have a good weekend. In Jesus' name, amen.